Is it possible for a Formula One team to intentionally sabotage its own star driver? And what happens when that driver is none other than Lewis Hamilton? Today I am going to tell you a story that calls into question the very foundations of Ferrari, and that could mark the beginning of the end in Maranello. The night of the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix will go down as one of the darkest in Ferrari's recent history. Not only because of the sporting result, which was already humiliating for a team with so many aspirations, but because of what it represented. The total breakdown of trust between the newly signed star driver, Lewis Hamilton, and the internal structure of the team. What happened at Marina Bay was not a simple reliability failure. It was the equivalent of a systemic collapse. From the first laps, something didn't add up. Hamilton's car, the SF25, did not respond as it should. Its behavior was erratic, especially in the braking zones, where the car showed overheating that compromised stability and traction when exiting corners. The sensors were beginning to emit alarm signals, but the team, instead of acting preventively, minimized the symptoms. The most disturbing thing was the contrast with what was expected. Ferrari had arrived in Singapore with internal promises of an improved performance package, especially for street circuits. There was talk of new calibrations in the energy recovery system and downforce adjustments that, in theory, would allow Hamilton to fight at the top. But when it came time to put everything on the track, the car became a death trap. Telemetry data leaked after the race showed irregularities that cannot be attributed to chance. The rear brakes reached temperatures that compromised both the pad compound and the integrity of the discs. Not only were temperatures unusually high, they also fluctuated wildly between sectors of the same circuit, something that can only be explained by active mismanagement or deliberate or unintentional misconfiguration. But the damage was not limited to the technical. What set off alarm bells in the paddock the most was the way the engineering team responded live. Hamilton reported unusual vibrations with each lap, loss of confidence when braking, and instability that he had never felt on other circuits. The response from the wall? Almost silence. Vague messages. Contradictory guidelines. Instead of protecting the driver, they seemed to be watching from a distance as if it were a test and not a scoring race. Under normal conditions, these types of problems are resolved with a pit order, a quick check, a configuration change. But Ferrari chose to keep Hamilton on the track, even though the data already anticipated a failure. It was a decision that cannot be understood from sporting logic. Only from a position of internal conflict or total lack of coordination. The atmosphere in the garage reflected that chaos. Behind closed doors there was talk of tensions between the technical departments and the new adjustments that Hamilton's arrival required. Some engineers considered that the British style required modifying the car's design philosophy. Others defended the status quo. And in that internal battle, the pilot ended up being collateral damage. That night, Ferrari didn't lose just one race. He lost credibility, lost cohesion. And what's worse, it planted the seed of a suspicion that threatens to fracture the team from within. Was it really a simple accumulation of errors? Or did someone within the team want to send a message? The fact that Frédéric Vasseur ordered an internal investigation the following day, with full access to telemetry, communications and pre-race settings, reveals the level of seriousness the incident reached. We are no longer talking about a bad weekend. We are talking about a potential crisis of confidence, where the word sabotage stopped being an exaggeration and became a possibility that no one within Maranello can completely rule out. And that was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come. When the recordings were reviewed, worrying situations were found. Hamilton asked for specific data on brake temperatures and aerodynamic balance, but received generic responses such as, everything is within parameters, or continue with the original plan. And the strangest thing is that this original plan clearly did not fit the real racing conditions. Why wasn't an immediate strategy adjustment made? Why was Hamilton kept on track for so much time with a configuration that clearly wasn't working? Added to this is a very unusual pattern for a top-level team. The lack of active intervention by the engineer in the face of an obvious technical problem. Under normal circumstances, the race engineer is the one who leads the solution, gives specific instructions, even interrupting the driver if he detects a critical fault. But in this case, Adami remained passive, even when signals from the braking system and rear differential showed dangerous inconsistencies. The failure of the SF25 in Singapore was not the product of chance or isolated misfortune. It was the physical manifestation of a design error as serious as it was avoidable. One that was present from the very conception of the car, and which, most disturbingly, was deliberately ignored by the technical department for months. The result? A drastic reduction in cooling efficiency, especially at times when it is needed most, just after a cornering sequence or after prolonged braking. That is exactly the kind of effort Singapore demands. The system was simply not prepared to survive in that environment. In this case, the price was very high. The failure didn't just ruin Hamilton's career. It exposed a structural weakness in the car that now calls the entire season into question. And what is even more serious, he revealed that Ferrari is not learning from its past mistakes. Engineering that has turned out to be a death sentence in critical conditions. A cooling system poorly conceived from the beginning. It's all part of the concept of aerodynamic integration that Ferrari pursued obsessively in the preseason. The technical team opted for a philosophy of extreme efficiency, which sought to reduce drag in favor of cleaner downforce. To do this, they relocated critical elements of the brake cooling system, which included completely redesigning the airflow channel at the rear of the car. This solution was considered innovative until the track proved otherwise. Ferrari built a trap for itself. A solution that seemed elegant, innovative, but was not validated in the type of conditions that really matter. Singapore was just the trigger. But the problem was already present in Melbourne, in Bahrain, and will be present in every circuit where temperature and braking effort are protagonists. And now, after having seen everything collapse, the big question is whether Ferrari has the ability and humility to redesign such a critical system on the fly. Because if they don't, this won't be the last time their car burns out under its own heat. By the time the checkered flag fell at Marina Bay, the SF-25's technical disaster was already evident. But what was brewing at that moment within the walls of Ferrari was even deeper than a sporting defeat. It was the beginning of an internal fracture. What was at stake was not simply the technical credibility of the team, but the continuity of a project that promised to mark an era with Lewis Hamilton at the helm. A project that now seems to be faltering, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of cohesion. Fred Vasseur, team director, was blunt. He ordered an immediate internal investigation. All telemetry channels, radio communications, pre-race technical data were opened, and even strategic meetings held during the week were reviewed. It was not a simple damage control exercise. It was an inquisitive process that exposed more than just a configuration error. It laid bare the internal tensions of a team that can't speak the same language. At the center of that storm is Hamilton. The 7-time world champion came to Maranello with a purpose: to close his sporting career with a new legacy, return Ferrari to the top, and break a title drought that now exceeds a decade. But what it has found is a divided technical structure, an internal culture resistant to change, and a latent mistrust that has turned it into a disruptive element. The Singapore scandal, beyond the on-track failure, has left political consequences that are already being felt in Maranello. There are sectors within the team that do not view the British work style favorably. Hamilton demands precision, real-time analysis, freedom to modify processes if performance warrants it. But Ferrari still operates under a hierarchical chain of command where every decision goes through multiple filters. In this environment, the pilot's voice is not always heard as it should be. This disconnect has already led to tense conversations between Hamilton and senior management. Sources close to the team say that the driver has requested a restructuring of the technical area around him, including a review of the role of his race engineer, Riccardo Adami. This is not a symbolic request. This is an operational requirement. For Hamilton, continuing with the same environment after what happened in Singapore would be like accepting to compete blindfolded. But changing a race engineer in the middle of the season is not a trivial decision. At Ferrari, every move of this type has profound repercussions. It involves reassigning functions, reorganizing teams, and above all, publicly admitting that something didn't work. For a team whose identity is based on tradition and image, this type of change is interpreted as a crisis, not an opportunity. And while all this is happening behind closed doors, time keeps ticking. The season progresses. Rivals evolve. McLaren has already consolidated its leadership with a competitive car and a technical structure that works like clockwork. Red Bull, despite its internal turbulence, remains a threat. Mercedes is rearming itself with a car that is increasingly responding better. Ferrari, on the other hand, is stuck in its own conflict. The dilemma for Hamilton is obvious. Can you continue betting on a project that does not guarantee either the internal unity or the technical response you need? Should you wait for changes to be implemented from the top, or should you push for a revolution that could further upset the team's balance? What is clear is that your margin of patience is shortening. You didn't come to Ferrari to build from scratch. You came to win.do. You think Hamilton is being sabotaged within Ferrari, or has he simply underestimated the complexity of changing a team from within? Should I demand a new career engineer or even threaten to abandon the project if radical changes are not made? Leave it to me in the comments.